Hello, good morning Year 6, and here is Friday's English lesson. And today we're going to be looking at the key features of a fantasy story again, and our learning objective is to understand them. So next week we can start to apply them to our work. Just going to start off with the pat again, and hopefully we're super clear on this now. So the purpose for writing a fantasy story, remember that's to entertain. The audience we talked about yesterday, that depends who we're writing the story for and the age group. And the type, the text type of a fantasy story is fiction and narrative genre. Okay, I'd like to share with you our knowledge organiser for our fantasy stories work. Those of you in school will be given one, and at home you can either use it from the screen or print one out. There's a PDF version of this on the website. This is a really handy document to refer to when writing your fantasy stories and for editing to check. On the left hand side we've got all the grammatical features of what kind of sentence structure we're looking at. We're going to be talking about subordinate clauses and relative clauses, trying to get that more interesting sentence structure to it. Adverbial phrases, we talk lots, don't we, about fronted adverbials linking to how and when and where. Conjunctions, we talk about fanboys and hands and feet in school, and there's some reminders there. And then the punctuation, we might be looking at brackets for extra information and dashes to emphasise additional information as well. And then on the right hand side, the main features of a fantasy story. We're going to be looking at these 5 points today and look how they relate to the Leon story and then how they relate to your story. And you can see there the front of some book covers of different fantasy stories. Maybe you've read some of those already. So it's really nice. Like we do in other subjects, we'll keep referring back to this. Okay. I want to share with you the text for the Leon and the Place Between story. It looks disjointed, but each chunk of text is from different double pages from the real book. And again, this PDF document is saved on the website, so you can have a look. I'd like you to have a read through of the story again, familiarise yourself. It's very different, isn't it, to the version I read yesterday, where the pictures help tell the story too and create that mood and atmosphere and how we see the characters and what the setting looks like. But the text, we mustn't forget, is really important too, and especially the layout and the font. Okay, so I said we're going to look at the structure. First of all, what I've done is taken some of those key photographs, key images of the book, and if you've got a copy of the book you can find these as we go through, and I want to just generally summarise, like you did yesterday in your independent work, what is happening at that point in the story. So here, this was at the very beginning and it didn't have text on this page, and we can simply say, well, the characters, we don't know who they are yet, they're going to a show. We know it's a show because it says on that sign there what they're looking at, magic show tonight. And then this was the next page, and that dramatic bang and the 3 jugglers appearing, and the show begins. Actually, it was a few pages in after that we'd seen the characters sat in the tent, but we know the show is beginning and that dramatical action, but very simply it's just beginning. A bit later on in the story we came across this picture. Do you remember where Leon is not scared of going in, he's almost excited by it. His friends or his brothers and sisters are a bit scared. So we can simply say, well, Leon goes into the magic box and is taken to another world. And I know some of you in your cold task talked about portal, a doorway to get through into a special world. And we can almost see this as representing that, a doorway into another world. Then the next few pages we looked at where Leon goes into and what's there, and and how he's shown around this place between. And we can simply summarise that by saying, well, events take place. And after all those events have taken place and Leon is called back and we see him come back out of the box and into the tent, we can simply say Leon returns with a rabbit. And I think it's really important there to say he returns with a rabbit, because that rabbit is symbolic and almost tells me, well, although it's fantasy, did it really happen? And it kind of sows that seed with the reader as we're wondering what did happen to him. So what I want to do now is to turn those those points were specific to the Leon story, but to make them more generic. And you can see within that word generic, general. So the line, the opening one, the first picture, we had the characters go to a show. If we make that more general, so we could apply it to any story, we might say the main character goes somewhere. It might be more than one character, but we've got the main character going somewhere. Where the show began, we could simply say, in general terms, the main character does something. So do you see what I'm doing here? I'm trying to apply it. I can apply this nice 5-point structure to a different story, but it would still hold a similar style to it. Where Leon goes into the magic box and is taken to another world, I want to change that to your main character goes through a portal and is transported to another world, because it might not be a magic box. It might be a magic doorway. It could be a wall. It could be going into a tree. So if we use that generic word portal, it can represent what we want it to be. Events take place was quite generic anyway, so I think we can keep that the same. We might have several events happen in that fantasy world. Leon returns with the rabbit was very specific to that story, so if we were making that more general, we might just say, well, the main character returns with a memento, something to remember. And it almost proves he's been to that fantasy world. When you're in lower school, you might have remembered reading Biff, Chip and Kipper books, and they always had that magic key, and the key starts to glow, and that's how they get taken to that fantasy world, but the key still exists in normal life. So if we look at them together now, we can see 5 points. So the main character goes somewhere, then the main character does something, then the main character goes through a portal and is transported to another world, events take place, and then the main character returns with a memento. And that's the structure from that knowledge organiser which we're going to use with our stories. So when you planned your cold task, I said you might wanted to use the IPL frame, and I know some of you did. But we can now start to think about, how does that generic structure sit alongside my IPL grid? Stories have that build-up, problem, resolution and ending, but how am I going to fit those 5 elements? And I want us to think of it like this. So the main character goes somewhere could be in that introduction, because you're starting to set the scene, just like when Leon and his friends or his brother and sister went to the tent. Then the main character does something. That's starting to build up the story, so it would go into that point there. The main character goes through a portal and is transported to another world. That's the beginning of my problem, because something might happen there, or they might have to do something in order to return. Events taking place would go into point 3 with the resolution. How do they solve those problems? What happens? And then finally the main character returns with a memento. That's going to go in the ending section. So do you see how that nicely flows to help us give our story our structure, rather than just us writing a fantasy story without any idea of where it's going? So your tasks for today, and you can pause the video and go back if you want to hear any of those again. I want you to read back through your fantasy story, your cold task you did on Wednesday. Have a read through. Then look back at the 5 different points for the generic structure of a fantasy story, which I've just shown you. And I've included this PowerPoint and as a PDF version on the website, so you've got it to refer to. Or you can just go back in the video and pause it. In your cold task, in your story you did for us on Wednesday, can you highlight or underline where you think you've included some of those structures? Maybe use a key and different colours to show me. And then can you have a go at editing some of those features in which you haven't included? What we call in school green pen editing. Don't worry if you've not got a green pen, it doesn't matter, you can do it in any colour. But how would you add some of those things in? Did you have a portal in your story? If not, could you find somewhere to put it in? And so if we finish off by looking at our knowledge organiser again, we can see those 5 points are on the top up there. Let me just see if my pen works. These bits here. Okay? And these are the bits I want you to check in your story if you've included them. Okay, I'm going to leave it there now. Next week we'll be starting to do some shared writing together, linked to fantasy stories, and I hope by Wednesday we might be able to have a live lesson on Teams where we'll be able to do some slow writing together, and I'll be able to have some of your feedback, just how we do it in school, like we do it in school, to be able to craft a piece together. Okay? Thank you, Year 6.